You're living the easiest life in human history, but your ancestors survived hell on earth for 2 million years. No Netflix, no delivery, without even knowing how to make fire. Every day was an epic battle against extinction. And you know what's even crazier? They had the same intelligence as you, the same fears, the same will to live, but zero comfort, zero security, zero guarantees. So tell me, if they managed to survive being chased by saber-toothed lions, why can't you get out of bed on a Monday? Stay until the end, because what you'll discover about your ancestors will blow your mind and make you question whether you really have what it takes to survive. So do you think you could survive? That you have the strength to face what your ancestors faced? Let me tell you exactly what that means. For 2 million years, that's right, 2 million, your ancestors lived in what I can only describe as a never-ending horror movie. Imagine waking up every day knowing you have a 50% chance of dying before sunset. It's not an exaggeration, it's pure statistics. While you complain about the Wi-Fi being slow, they didn't know if they would have clean water to drink. While you stress because you're out of milk, they went days without eating. While you fear cockroaches in the bathroom, they slept knowing a cave bear could appear at any moment. But here's what will blow your mind. They had the same brain as you, the same capacity to feel pain, fear, despair, the same will to live. The difference? Zero comfort, zero security, zero guarantees. Think about it. You've probably never been truly hungry. Hunger that aches in your stomach, that makes you think about food 24/7, that leaves you too weak to walk. They lived like this constantly. You never slept not knowing if you would wake up alive. You never had to choose between staying warm or hiding. You never had to decide if a piece of rotten meat was worth risking your life for. And you know what's even crazier? They didn't have Google to research how to survive in the wild. They didn't have YouTube with survival tutorials. Every piece of knowledge was earned with blood, sweat, and death. Every mistake cost lives, but wait, because I haven't told you about the most desperate part of all, how they got food when there were no supermarkets, delivery, or even agriculture. And the worst isn't yet, because now I'm going to show you what it really means to fight for survival when every meal could be your last. Your ancestors weren't hunters. They were beggars of nature. You know those stray dogs that wait for leftover food? It was exactly that, but with lions and hyenas. They crawled, literally crawled after predators, waiting for the crumbs of a hunt that wasn't theirs. Imagine the humiliation. You, with an intelligence equal to mine and yours, being forced to wait for a lion to finish eating so you could lick the bones. And when I say lick, I mean it. They took sharp stones and scraped bones until they got that yellowish marrow slime. That was scavenging for them. But here's what will make you sick. When there wasn't even carrion to be found, they ate anything that moved. Earthworms, crickets, fat grubs they dug out of rotten logs, roots they pulled from the earth with their bleeding fingernails, fruit so rotten you'd vomit just smelling it. And it didn't exist. Oh, it's spoiled. If it was there, you ate it. Wormy meat, extra protein, fermented fruit, a special dinner because the alternative was feeling your stomach devour you until you passed out from weakness. But then something revolutionary happened. They discovered that together they were lethal. They began to organize themselves like gangs, setting ambushes, using coordinated screams to confuse their prey. For the first time, they were no longer victims. They were predators. Now imagine the first time they managed to bring down a mammoth, the explosion of euphoria, the relief of knowing they wouldn't starve to death that week. But also imagine the desperate pressure. That mountain of meat had to be consumed quickly. There was no refrigerator, no salt. You either ate until you felt sick or watched it all rot. And here's what will shock you. When they killed an animal, they used literally everything. Meat, organs, blood, skin, bones, tendons, even the stomach contents. Because wasting even a tiny bit meant someone in the group might starve to death the next day. But getting food was just the beginning of the nightmare. Why haven't I told you about the discovery that transformed them from animals into something completely different? The discovery that changed the fate of humanity forever. But don't think they simply rubbed two pebbles together and that was it. No. Fire was the holy grail of survival. It was the difference between being human and just another animal waiting to die. Imagine this. You've just gotten meat after days of starvation, but you can't cook it. You have to eat it raw, bloody, full of parasites that will slowly kill you from the inside. Your teeth can't chew properly, your stomach can't digest, and you're still at risk of contracting diseases that will leave you in agony for weeks. Now imagine the first time someone saw lightning strike a tree and it burst into flames. The first time someone had the insane courage to approach those flames and realize, this might save me. But here's what will shock you. Most clans never mastered fire. That's right. Entire groups of intelligent people like you and me lived and died without ever learning to make a simple fire. To them, fire was pure magic, the work of gods. The few who could make fire became kings of survival. They had cooked food that was easier to digest. They had light to see predators in the darkness. They had heat to avoid freezing to death. They had a weapon to scare away wild animals. But keeping the fire going was a constant nightmare. There were no lighters, no matches. If the fire went out during the night, you could die before dawn. So they took shifts. Someone always stayed awake, stoking the flames, always, because letting the fire die was a death sentence for the entire group. And do you know what's even more desperate? Sometimes they carried lit torches for days guarding that fire like a baby, because it was easier to keep the fire alive than to try to start a new one. Fire wasn't just a tool, it was hope. It was the promise that maybe, just maybe, you could survive another day. It was the difference between being prey and being a predator. The true nightmare that began when the sun went down. And that nightmare had a name. Night. You complain when the power goes out in your house for 10 minutes. Now imagine living in total darkness for 12 hours straight, knowing that any sound could mean your death is approaching. Because in the Stone Age, night wasn't just dark, it was deadly. Sleeping was literally gambling with your life. There was no bed, no pillow, no door to lock. You lay on the cold ground, on wet leaves or sharp rocks, and hoped to wake up alive, and many didn't. They slept in tight circles, bodies pressed together, not out of affection, but out of desperation. Body heat was the difference between waking and freezing to death. In the center of the circle, a weak fire. In your hands, sharp rocks and pointed sticks. In your ears, you were fully alert to any noise, because any noise could be a jaguar approaching silently. Any movement in the shadows could be a cave bear sniffing for human flesh. Any snapping twig could be another clan coming to steal your food and kill your family. And here's what will give you chills. They slept with one eye open, literally. They created a shift system where someone was always on watch, always. Because 30 seconds of carelessness could mean the slaughter of the entire group. Imagine the psychological strain. You're exhausted, hungry, cold, but you can't completely relax, not even for a second. Their brains were always on high alert, always expecting the worst, always ready to run or fight. And when it rained, when it was windy, when it was truly cold, they huddled together like animals, breathing down each other's necks, sharing what little warmth they had, because being alone in the darkness was a guaranteed death sentence. Otherwise, caves offered protection, but they were also damp, smelly traps teeming with bats and insects. And worst of all, you never knew if another tenant was already living there, another predator that considered that cave its territory. But you know what was most impressive? Even in this constant terror, even in this absolute vulnerability, they didn't give up. They clung to each other. They cared for the wounded. They protected the weak. Because from this total vulnerability, this shared fear, this collective desperation, something was born that would change everything forever, something that made us truly human. And that something was the birth of the collective soul, because here's what will blow your mind. In the midst of all this terror, in the midst of this desperate struggle for survival, they did something that defies all evolutionary logic. They chose each other. It wasn't romantic love, it wasn't Christian kindness. It was something far more powerful, a need that became devotion. They realized that alone they were prey, but together they were a force of nature. Imagine the mental revolution. You've been starving for 3 days, you get a piece of meat. Your primal instincts scream, "Devour it all now." But you look at the skeletal child in the group, at the old man who taught you to make fire, at the pregnant woman who carries the future, and you share. You literally bring your own survival instincts to keep your tribe alive. They invented something that didn't exist in nature, lethal altruism. Dying for the group wasn't heroism, it was mathematics. One dead to save 10 was a good deal. And here's what will chill you. They cared for the useless. Archaeologists have found skeletons of people who lived for years with broken bones, blind, crippled. Do you know what this means? Someone carried those who couldn't walk. Someone chewed. Food for those who had no teeth. Someone protected those who couldn't defend themselves. This isn't animal instinct, this is pure humanity. But the craziest thing is that they did it without a single word. They didn't yet know how to speak, but they already knew how to love in a way we've lost. They already knew how to cry real tears when someone died. They already knew how to laugh with their whole body when they got food. They already knew how to hug as if their life depended on it. Communication was pure soul, a look that saved lives, a gesture that meant you're not alone, a touch that healed wounds no medicine could reach. And do you know what the result of this emotional revolution was? They were no longer thinking animals, they were feeling humans. They had created the first family in history, not of blood, but of choice, not of convenience, but of brutal love. But then they did something that definitively proved they had transcended the animal condition, something that changed the meaning of existence itself. And that something was the moment they decided to be immortal. No, they didn't discover the fountain of youth. They discovered something much more revolutionary, the need to scream for eternity. I existed in that. You're in a freezing cave, starving, knowing you could die at any second. And then you do something that defies all logic of survival. You take your own blood, burnt coal, red earth, and paint your hand on the rocky wall. Why? Because someone fighting death would waste precious energy making art, because they discovered the secret that moves us to this day. You only truly die when you are forgotten. That hand painted on the wall was a desperate cry across the millennia. I felt pain, I loved, I mattered, I was real. And it wasn't decoration, it was war against the void. They painted the mammoths, they felled, the faces they loved, the battles they won. Not to beautify caves, to immortalize moments so that someone thousands of years later would know they lived intensely. But here's what will give you goosebumps. They began burying their dead with wildflowers. People who barely had food for the living spent hours collecting petals for the dead. They placed their best tools, precious food, sacred objects with the body. This isn't animal instinct, this is pure faith. They believed that death was just a passage, that something greater existed, that it was worth honoring the departed, because they would continue to exist somewhere. And do you know what's most impressive? These paintings, these burials, these soul marks, they conquered time. 40,000 years later, archaeologists still find these painted hands. Still moved by these careful burials, they achieved the impossible. They defeated death, not biologically, but spiritually. Because as long as we look at those paintings and feel something in our chests, they continue to breathe through us. They invented the first religion, the first art, the first philosophy, all at once, all born from the same desperate thirst to transcend one's own mortality. And here's what will blow your mind. You do exactly the same thing when you post a photo, when you tell a story, when you leave a comment. You're painting your hand in the digital cave, you're shouting, I am here. By the way, if this revelation touched you deeply, if it made you rethink what it means to be alive, like this video, because just as our ancestors left their eternal marks in the caves, you're leaving your mark here, proving that this story resonates, that it deserves to echo through time. And tell me in the comments what moment in your life you'd like to paint on a wall for eternity. What would you do to be remembered? Because every word you write here is your personal cave painting. It's you saying, I thought, I felt, I existed. If you want to discover more secrets about what made us human, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Every week, I unravel mysteries that will transform how you see yourself in the world. And share this video with someone who needs to remember that they carry within them the strength of millions of survivors. Because this discovery of immortality through memory has brought us here to you, M.